Imagine walking through the woods expecting nothing but the crisp bite of December air, the crunch of leaves under your boots, and maybe, if you're lucky, the flash of whitetail from a deer. Now imagine that same walk ending with the sight of a human torso lying in the brush. Not an animal, not a hunter's kill, but the dismembered remains of a woman. No missing person report matched her. No one in the area was even known to be gone. She was a mystery, abandoned in the woods like a secret that someone hoped would never be uncovered. This was December 2022, deep in the forests of southeast Georgia, in the grounds of the historic Portal Hunting Club in Riceboro. Over the course of 5 horrifying days, hunters and searchers uncovered more pieces of the same body. A leg found 2.5 miles from the torso, another leg discovered soon after. And then, as if the story couldn't get darker, a head buried shallow beneath a tree, its roots disturbed, as though the killer had tried to hide at least one part of their crime. The gruesome discoveries sent shockwaves through the small towns around Liberty and Long counties. Whoever this woman was, she hadn't just been killed, she had been brutalized. And yet, the most chilling question was not who killed her. It was who she even was. Because for nearly 6 months, investigators had no name, no history, no context for the woman whose body lay in pieces across a 3-mile radius of hunting ground. She was simply Jane Doe of Riceboro, and her killer had left just enough behind to haunt, but not enough to easily solve. But when her identity was finally revealed, when the victim was named as 40-year-old Mindi Kassotis, the investigation exploded into one of the most bizarre, labyrinthine true crime cases in modern Georgia history. It would pull investigators into a web of lies, paranoia, hidden identities, and betrayals, so twisted it sounded more like a dark thriller novel than reality. This is the story of Mindi Kassotis, and it begins not with her life but with her death. On the afternoon of December 2, 2022, 2 hunters walked along Jones Road with their dogs. The Portal Hunting Club, stretching across 13,000 acres of swamp and forest, was familiar territory. They had just taken down a deer, and as hunters always do, they trusted their dogs to lead them to the kill. But the dogs didn't run toward their prize. They pulled instead toward the roadside brush, stopping at something that instantly turned the hunter's blood cold. It was not a deer. It was a torso. Police descended almost immediately. The forest, normally alive with the sound of dogs and gunshots, was transformed into a crime scene. Over the next several days, teams combed the area. It was painstaking work. Each discovery was another blow. A right leg, identified only because a buzzard circled above it. A left leg, uncovered by a dog. And finally, on December 7th, 5 days after the initial discovery, a searcher noticed disturbed earth beneath a tree. Digging into the soil, they unearthed the head of a woman. The brutality was undeniable. She had not been left whole. She had been dismembered deliberately, intentionally. Investigators concluded that her remains had been brought there in large plastic totes, 2 of which, one black and one gray, were found discarded nearby. Both were wiped down with bleach. Both contained blood residue. Scattered around were disinfectant wipes,
grew suspicious of Jim McIntyre,
used to scrub
the
away
Navy
DNA.
vet had believed
A
what Jim
red-handled Milwaukee
apparently told
utility
him.
knife lay
This
abandoned in the
included
dirt,
one
also
central
wiped
lie,
clean.
that Nick's
Forensic
father,
analysis
Wayne
later determined it
Kassotis,
had no
was
DNA,
not his
no
biological
fingerprints,
father,
no
and
traceable
was in
connection.
fact the
It wasn't the
person
weapon that
behind
killed
the
her,
threats,
nor the tool that
harassment,
dismembered
as
her.
well as
It
the
was something
physical
else
attack
entirely,
with the baseball
perhaps
bat
purchased as
that
part
Nick
of a
had
cover-up,
allegedly
perhaps
suffered.
discarded when
Nick's
it became
belief
useless.
that his
The
life was in
medical
danger
examiner's
was
report was
integral
grim.
to
The
understanding
victim
the
had
steps
suffered
he
at
took
least
around
9
the time
blows to the
of
skull.
Mindy's death.
Her arms bore
The
defensive
couple were
wounds,
always
proof
following
that she had
instructions
tried to
from
fight
Jim
back.
and his
Her
security
abdomen
team,
had been stabbed
whom they
repeatedly.
trusted
Experts
unquestionably
concluded that
to
power
protect
tools
them.
were likely used to cut her body apart, though exactly what kind remained unclear. And still, for all the evidence, the totes, the wipes, the knife, the blood, one question remained unanswered. Who was she? Fingerprints brought no matches. Her DNA didn't register in any law enforcement databases. Even her dental implant,
On the morning of November
often a reliable
29,
tool for
Nick claimed
identification,
to have been
led
directed
nowhere.
by his security
Weeks turned to
team
months
to pack
as
his and
investigators
Mindy's
built
personal
forensic
belongings
sketches
into
and
large
released them to the
plastic
public.
totes in
Each lead
preparation
was
for a
pursued.
move from Savannah.
Each tip collapsed.
It would be one
and
of
so she
over
remained
50
nameless,
moves the
her
couple
story
made
trapped
over
in
a
the soil
3-year
of
period,
Riceboro's woods.
ostensibly
But in
for
the
their own
background,
safety.
genealogists
Always.
worked quietly, patiently, building family trees from the tiniest genetic clues. By tracing potential relatives, they closed in. And after nearly 6 months, the breakthrough came. The woman was Mindi Kassotis, a 40-year-old wife, daughter, and sister. Her DNA matched a sample provided by her mother, Betsy. And suddenly, What had been a mystery body in the woods became a devastating family tragedy. Mindi was the eldest of 3 children, with 2 younger brothers, Frank Jr. and Matthew. She was close to her parents, Frank and Betsy. Friends and family remembered her as intelligent, compassionate, and ambitious. She had earned a master's degree in public service and worked as a legal secretary before moving into nonprofit work, driven by her desire to help others. She was warm, loyal, and deeply connected to the people she loved. Her husband was Mindi Kassotis, a decorated Navy veteran, a former JAG prosecutor, a man who had served in Iraq and worked at the Pentagon. On paper, Nicholas was everything a family would hope for in a son-in-law: successful, disciplined, patriotic. The couple married in 2016, first living with Mindi's brother Frank Jr. and his wife before settling into a bungalow in Savannah with her parents. It was, by all accounts, a loving marriage, or so it appeared. When investigators informed Betsy and Frank of their daughter's true fate, their grief turned to shock. Because according to them, they already knew Mindi had died. Nicholas had told them so, only the story he told them was nothing like reality. According to Nicholas, Mindi had passed away in early December 2022 from a sudden stroke while in the hospital, where she was being monitored for blood pressure issues. It was a devastating loss, made worse by the fact that she was 8 months pregnant, due to give birth in January. He claimed he had been called to collect her, only to be informed by staff that she had died suddenly.
Where it was, I drove out there that afternoon. It was a brick building. Somebody was waiting outside and brought me into, like an office, and said that Mindi passed away. Okay. He said that she just passed away very suddenly, and that they thought it might have been her heart, but they weren't sure.
They told you that she passed away?
Yeah.
And what did you do then?
I yelled and sobbed.
Okay.
I was a wreck.
He described yelling, sobbing, falling apart at the news. He said an autopsy had been planned, but then a mistake was made. He was told she had been cremated prematurely. Nicholas said he was furious, heartbroken. But when a man demanded $5,000 in cash to release the ashes, he complied. He drove to Montgomery, Alabama, withdrew the money, and handed it over. He left with what he believed were his wife's remains. He never asked a man's name. He never asked for a death certificate. And he never arranged the memorial service he promised Mindi's family. Instead, he quietly moved on. For Mindi's parents, who trusted their son-in-law, the story was tragic but believable. They accepted that their daughter had died of natural causes, though they never saw her body. They began grieving quietly, unaware that the truth was far more sinister, because at that same time, while they mourned a stroke and a mistaken cremation, their daughter's real body was lying in pieces across the Georgia woods. And Nicholas's strange story was only the beginning. When investigators dug into his life, they uncovered a labyrinth of deception. He wasn't just a grieving husband. He was a man who claimed to be under threat from shadowy forces, a man who told elaborate stories of FBI agents, secret security teams, and hidden enemies. He was a man whose lies went so deep that even his closest loved ones could not tell where truth ended and fantasy began. What investigators were about to learn was this: Mindi's murder was not just about rage or betrayal or even control. It was wrapped inside a bizarre narrative of paranoia and manipulation that left everyone, family, friends, even seasoned detectives, questioning how much of Mindi Kassotis' life had ever been real. Stay with me. The story will take a turn into a world of fabricated threats, shadow identities, and a man named Jim McIntyre, a figure who may not have even existed, yet controlled nearly every decision Nicholas and Mindi made in the years before her death. When investigators first confronted Mindi Kassotis with the reality of his wife's death, his story seemed surreal. He described the hospital, the phone call, the sudden collapse, the mistaken cremation. He spoke of a cash exchange in Alabama that sounded more like a drug deal than a grieving husband retrieving ashes. But soon, detectives realized that Nicholas's strange account was not an isolated lie. It was part of a much larger pattern, a bizarre, tangled web of stories that he had been weaving for years. At the center of this web was a man named Jim McIntyre. According to Nicholas, Jim was a shadowy figure with immense power. He claimed Jim worked for the FBI, or sometimes the CIA, or perhaps even a private security contractor with government ties. The details shifted depending on who Nicholas was talking to, but one theme remained constant. Jim controlled everything. Nicholas insisted that Jim had agents watching him and Mindi around the clock. He claimed that Jim was monitoring their phones, following their movements, and manipulating their lives. He told friends that if he and Mindi disobeyed Jim's orders, terrible consequences would follow. In fact, Nicholas painted Jim as so omnipotent that even life and death events, like Mindi's supposed stroke and cremation, could be explained by his influence. The more investigators learned, the more bizarre it became. Nicholas said Jim forced him to resign from the Navy JAG Corps. He said Jim demanded that he move constantly, cutting off ties with friends and family. He said Jim monitored his finances, sometimes even instructing him to withdraw or deliver large amounts of cash without explanation. To Nicholas, Jim wasn't just a man. He was a phantom puppeteer. But here's the chilling truth. No evidence has ever surfaced that Jim McIntyre even existed. Not one document, not one phone record, not one credible witness could place Jim anywhere in Nicholas's life. The only source for Jim's existence was Nicholas himself. And Mindi? She had believed him. Family members and friends later revealed how Nicholas gradually isolated Mindi from them. He told her their phones were bugged. He said she was in danger if she contacted her parents too often. He explained away his paranoia by insisting it was necessary for her safety. At first, Mindi resisted. She had always been close to her mother, Betsy, and her father, Frank. She loved her brothers. But over time, Nicholas's stories wore her down. Slowly, painfully, she became more isolated, more dependent on him, more willing to believe his tales of shadowy surveillance. By the time of her death, she was nearly cut off from everyone who loved her. Detectives now had to piece together not just a crime, but a psychological prison. The first breakthrough came from technology. By examining GPS data from Nicholas's phone, investigators tracked his movements in the days surrounding Mindi's disappearance. The data revealed something shocking. On November 30th, Nicholas's phone had traveled directly to the wooded area near the Portal Hunting Club, the exact location where Mindi's remains were later found. He had been there before the hunters discovered her, but Nicholas claimed he hadn't dumped her body. He said Jim McIntyre had ordered him to take Mindi to a specific location, then to leave. He insisted he was just following instructions, terrified of what might happen if he disobeyed. To detectives, this excuse only deepened his guilt. If Jim didn't exist, then Nicholas had just incriminated himself. More evidence surfaced. Police obtained records showing Nicholas had rented an Airbnb in Riceboro, not far from the hunting grounds. When investigators entered the property, their suspicions were confirmed. In the bathroom, luminol revealed large traces of blood. DNA testing matched it to Mindi. The Airbnb had been scrubbed, but not well enough. Even bleach couldn't erase everything. Detectives also found receipts for power tools purchased shortly before Mindi's disappearance, tools consistent with the type used to dismember her body. Piece by piece, the story Nicholas had spun was falling apart. As prosecutors built their case, Mindi's family struggled with the weight of betrayal. Betsy and Frank had trusted Nicholas. They had believed him when he said their daughter had died of natural causes. They had comforted him, even supported him, in the days after her supposed cremation. Now they had to grapple with the horrific truth. While they grieved in silence, Nicholas had been disposing of their daughter's body in the woods. For Mindi's brother, Frank Jr., the anger was indescribable. He had once opened his home to Nicholas and Mindi. He had treated Nicholas like family. Now he realized that every smile, every story, every act of kindness had been masking a darkness he couldn't have imagined, and the lies only grew stranger. Nicholas insisted that Jim McIntyre had orchestrated Mindi's death to cover up a secret pregnancy, that the government wanted her silenced, that he was a pawn caught in a larger conspiracy. He told detectives wild stories about FBI safe houses, covert missions, and surveillance teams lurking outside his home. But to prosecutors, the truth was far simpler. Nicholas was lying to cover his tracks. By mid-2023, the case against him was overwhelming. He was indicted on multiple charges, including malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, concealing the death of another, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, abandoning or concealing a dead body. The courtroom battle was looming. For Mindi's parents, the prospect of justice was bittersweet. They had lost their daughter in the most brutal way imaginable. They had been deceived by a son-in-law they once trusted. and they were about to relive every detail of her death in court. But one thing was clear. Nicholas would finally be forced to face the truth. Still, one haunting question remained. Had he truly believed in Jim McIntyre, this phantom figure he blamed for everything? Or was it all a calculated manipulation, a fantasy spun to control Mindi and excuse his crimes? Because if Nicholas really believed Jim was real, then this wasn't just a story about murder. It was about a descent into paranoia so deep that even Nicholas himself might not have known where the lies ended and reality began. And for the jury, that distinction, delusion or deception, would become the heart of the case. Stay with me, because in the next seconds, we'll confront the chilling courtroom showdown, the haunting testimonies of Mindi's family, and the final verdict that decided the fate of the man who turned a life of love into a story of lies and dismemberment. By the time Mindi Kassotis stepped into a courtroom, the nation was already watching. The story of his wife's death, the dismembered remains, the bizarre lies about hospitals and cremations, the phantom figure named Jim McIntyre, had made headlines not just in Georgia, but across the country. The case had all the elements of a psychological thriller. A decorated Navy veteran turned suspect, a young wife brutally murdered, a family grieving under a fog of deception, and an investigation that uncovered layer after layer of paranoia and lies. But in the courtroom, the theatrics had to give way to facts. The prosecution's case was methodical, chilling, and relentless. They began with the timeline. They showed how Nicholas's GPS data placed him near the Portal Hunting Club woods on November 30th, days before Mindi's remains were discovered there. They presented receipts showing he had rented an Airbnb in Riceboro, not far from the dump site. And they revealed what forensic investigators had found inside that Airbnb bathroom: blood spatter, matched by DNA to Mindi. Then came the physical evidence: the totes, the disinfectant wipes, the red-handled utility knife, the receipts for power tools consistent with dismemberment. Each piece connected Nicholas not just to Mindi's death, but to the deliberate concealment of her body. Finally, they unveiled the lies. The story of the hospital, the mysterious call, the supposed cremation mistake, the cash for ashes handoff in Alabama. It was absurd on its face, but devastating in its cruelty. Because it wasn't just an alibi. It was a way to manipulate Mindi's grieving parents, to buy himself time, to keep the truth buried. For the jury, the message was clear. Nicholas wasn't just guilty of murder. He was guilty of staging a performance so elaborate that it added another layer of torment to a grieving family. The defense faced a monumental challenge. Their strategy hinged on Nicholas's state of mind. They painted him not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a man trapped in a delusion. They argued that he had fallen under the psychological grip of his own paranoia, that he truly believed Jim McIntyre existed, that he lived in a constant state of fear, and that his bizarre behavior was the result of mental illness, not malice. At times, Nicholas himself leaned into this defense. He described Jim as a shadowy puppeteer who had orchestrated Mindi's death, forced him to obey impossible commands, and manipulated every corner of their lives. He insisted that he hadn't wanted to hurt his wife, that he was simply powerless against forces beyond his control. But the prosecution tore those claims apart. If Jim McIntyre exists, one attorney argued, where is he? Where is a single phone call, a single email, a single trace of this man's presence? Jim is a ghost invented by the defendant because the alternative is admitting the truth, that he murdered his wife, dismembered her body, and lied to her family in the cruelest way imaginable. The courtroom fell silent. Then came the testimony of Mindi's family. Her mother, Betsy, spoke softly but firmly. She recounted how Nicholas had told her about Mindi's supposed stroke, how he had convinced her that her daughter had been cremated by mistake. She described how she had trusted him, even comforted him in those days of mourning, only to learn later that her daughter had been lying in pieces in the woods. Her father struggled to contain his emotion as he spoke of Mindi's intelligence, her compassion, her ambition. He described the betrayal of realizing that his son-in-law had fed him lies while concealing the truth of her death. Her brother, Frank Jr., was more direct. His anger poured out as he described Nicholas as manipulative, controlling, and dishonest. He told the jury how Nicholas had isolated Mindi from her family, cut her off from contact, and fed her paranoid fantasies about government surveillance. Each word was a dagger. Each testimony a reminder that this case wasn't just about a crime scene. It was about a family torn apart, a life stolen, a trust shattered beyond repair. As the trial drew to a close, the jury was left with two competing stories. In one, Mindi Kassotis was a murderer, motivated by control, perhaps by paranoia, who killed his wife in a moment of rage, dismembered her body, and spun lies to cover his tracks. In the other, he was a man so consumed by delusion that he believed in an imaginary handler, Jim McIntyre, and acted under the weight of that paranoia, not out of cold intent. The deliberations stretched into hours. The jury weighed every piece of evidence, every testimony, every bizarre twist, and then they returned with their verdict. Guilty. Mindi Kassotis was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, concealing a death, and abandoning a dead body. The sentence: life in prison. For Mindi's family, the verdict was both a relief and a heartbreak. They had fought for justice, and they had won. But no verdict could bring Mindi back. No prison sentence could erase the horror of the lies they had been told, or the pain of knowing her last moments had been so brutal. For the community, the case left scars. The woods of Riceboro, once a place for hunting and quiet walks, would forever be haunted by the memory of what was found there. The name Jim McIntyre would remain an eerie footnote, a phantom who may have been nothing more than a figment of one man's paranoid mind, yet who shaped the fate of an entire family. And for Nicholas, the once decorated Navy veteran, the story ended not in honor, but in disgrace. His uniform traded for a prison jumpsuit, his reputation destroyed, his freedom gone. But the story of Mindi Kassotis is not just about her death. It is about her life. She was a daughter, a sister, a wife, and a friend. She was a woman who devoted her career to helping others, who loved her family deeply, who carried within her the hope of motherhood. She deserved a future. Her legacy now rests in the memories of those who knew her, in the love her family continues to carry, and in the story told here, a reminder of how deception, paranoia, and violence can unravel lives in the most horrifying ways. So as this case closes, one truth remains. Justice may be imperfect, but it is vital, because without it, the lies win. And for Mindi, the lies have already taken too much. If you want more chilling true crime stories like this, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with me, because the next case will take you even deeper into the shadows.